We okay, Hannah? Thank you. Okay, everybody, we'll resume the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 26th of May. And we are now up to item number 9, which is the Victoria Esplanade Bonsai Shade House project options on page 55. And we have Kathy Diva-Todd. And is Aaron joining you, Kathy? And Aaron. So ready when you are.
Thank you, councillors. I do acknowledge that this is a relatively complex report. It is complex because of the number of options around scope and funding. But just before we answer any questions around the report itself, I just want to highlight a few things to council. So, councillor, you made provision in the 2018 long-term plan for the construction of a bonsai house and for the replacement of the shade house, which flowed in from the renewals program from the asset management plan. And the shade house is currently at its end of life. During a council workshop in February, you gave council direction when we were talking about the various master plan projects and indicated that you wish to see a large, high-quality facility and were supportive of fundraising for any budget shortfall. So since that time, and what brings us to the committee today, is that detailed design and consenting has been completed. Applications for external funding have also been made, and these unfortunately have been unsuccessful. And our work to date indicates that we have a significant funding shortfall for the project. This report seeks council direction on the scope and the funding of the project. It is a difficult timing, obviously, because you're in discussions around the LTP, but we're talking here about a current year project. It would be remiss of officers to not have this information and bring it forward for you in time for your LTP deliberations, because you should consider all available information when you're considering your long-term planning, hence why we've got it on the agenda today. So the result of the balance of the project funding for this current year will need to be carried forward into the 2021-22 year, because obviously we're quite late in the year and we can't finish the project. But from today we're seeking two things: direction from the council on the scope and that direction on the funding. The recommendations on the report before you are the recommendations of the officers for the proposed scope and funding options for inclusion in your 2021 long-term plan deliberations. And thank you. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Is there anything further? Right, you're ready for questions. So, Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kathy, for the report. I have two questions. One is related to this report, but not directly related. Can I ask if we have a policy of accepting gifts or donations as a council?
In regards to?
Because of there were two donations in terms of.
Oh, you're referring to the bonsai.
Yes.
Perhaps I can ask Kathy or somebody.
Yes, we do have a policy on gifts, but it generally relates to money and goods that are given to individual officers. It's an internal policy as opposed to assets that are given to the council as an entity.
All right. I'm asking just because we are dealing with this thing for the last few years. Tomorrow I can bring a thing and say this thing needs to be kept in a place which needs $2 million. So who will decide that whether we should accept this donation or gift or not?
Perhaps the CFO may answer that.
That's a good question, and we don't currently have a policy.
All right, thank you. And number two, when a certain building fails a compliance, is there a penalty then that we put on the owners, or?
Can I ask for clarification on that question? So you're talking about compliance from RMA, Building Act? I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear what you're asking.
Because this one, page 62, 2.5 says in 2013, an engineer assessed that the condition of the shade house, the timber structure attached to the front of the Peter Black Conservatory was failing. So what does that mean? Was that not compliant with the current code, or?
No, that's not correct. In terms of what we're saying, that the structure itself is failing, so therefore there is a condition with the structure, which means it may create health and safety issues in the future if it isn't addressed in terms of replacement. However, that doesn't indicate anything to do with the compliance of the building or the structure for the activity that's been undertaken within it.
So in other words, that building was not dangerous for the users?
As a building ages in its condition, the risk of failure increases and therefore the risk associated with danger. However, that has been assessed by an engineer, and the engineer indicates that there's a year at his best estimate of remaining life in that asset before we would replace it. However, that doesn't mean at the end of a year the building is going to suddenly fail. That is just an engineering assessment and judgment.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy and Aaron. So, Kathy, you mentioned that there have been funding applications declined. I'm just wondering whether it's funding applications or if it's just the PGF fund that's referenced in the report.
Formally, just the PGF, thank you, PGF fund. However, informally, approaches have been made to funding bodies and those have been unsuccessful, but no application has been made. It's been indicated that the funding is not available.
Are you able to give an idea of what the funding bodies are? Are they local charity? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not asking you to disclose who we've had informal conversations with, but there's a difference between a trust that gives out funding versus pub charities, for example.
Neither of those, an organisation.
An organisation, okay. And the fund that was declined, understanding it's quite a contentious fund that's a lot of people are interested in. Was there any feedback that came back to the organisation as to what fell outside of the scope or the priorities for that fund? Do you know what I mean? Like, is there anything that we can put a bit of context around? I'm trying to understand if there's other funding opportunities or realistically this is just not a desirable project to fund.
Council made an application council-wide, not on an individual project, so I'll ask the Chief Financial Officer to answer that.
Yeah, so what was declined was the PGF funding, and that was really because it didn't meet their criteria. They weren't specific about that particular project. I would hazard a guess around the amount of employment it creates and their criteria for that PGF funding in the first place.
Yeah,
it was only a small project. Our funding officer, Bevan, has been involved in this project and is pretty confident that we could get the funding. So at the moment, the report's recommending seeking 150 of external funding. He seems reasonably confident we'll be able to achieve that.
Okay, cool. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you both. I've got few questions around the wayfinding and accessibility components. I must admit I got a little bit lost along the way. I know some of the options included those and some didn't. I guess it'd be good to have an understanding of why those aspects are bundled with the bonsai house and shade house, and also how much of the budget is attributed to the accessibility and wayfinding. And also, I guess, looking at page 87, in terms of the outline of the master plan and the costings for individual projects, it seems to me that there is already wayfinding and the accessibility components in there, or am I understanding that correctly or not? Sorry, I hope that's clear what I'm asking.
So we will take those questions in order, if that's okay with you. So the first question relates to... Sorry, can I ask you to repeat your question?
Oh, sorry. So the first question is, why have the accessibility and wayfinding components been bundled together with the bonsai house and shade house?
So, councillor, I refer you to figure 4 at 2.11. And clearly...
What page? Sorry. 2.11. Oh, yep. Yep.
So that clearly shows that there is, in comparison to figure 3, there is quite a difference in the location of this piece of work, and as a result of that, there is quite a bit of groundworks and paving that are required to accommodate that. When we have put forward the schedule of works for this project, we have separated out those things that relate to the building and those things that are associated with the project. As we move through the esplanade with the various projects, all of them will have a component of wayfinding and adjustment as we go through. So, for example, we have provision within the master plan budgets for wayfinding associated with when the mini golf proposal goes in, for example. The mini golf proposal goes in, we have to adjust paths, we may have to adjust vegetation and gardens. So each of the projects will have components of wayfinding. This particular one, though, however, provides a unique opportunity to make that connection between the existing duck pond and the central area that has been greatly lacking, and was highlighted in the master plan as one of the things that we really needed to do in the central area.
Okay, so just to follow on from that, if we do not progress the recommendations that are in front of us today, can we still assume that the wayfinding and accessibility components will remain as they are outlined in the master plan, the Victoria Esplanade Development Plan, under attachment 2?
Yes, for those components that are projects other than the one that we've got on the table in front of us today. The project that's on the table in front of us today doesn't resolve the wayfinding issues for the central area, so we would still have to look at how we were going to improve the wayfinding through there. If you remember, councillors, there's been discussion about including the exotic aviaries. Originally this project was going to be sitting where the blue duck enclosure is, and that has changed, so there's quite a few changes that have occurred as a result of new projects coming along since the master plan was developed, and those things, we're looking to resolve some of those outstanding issues as part of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for this report. My question is more around options for proceeding, and I'm not 100% clear why we need a decision today, particularly if you're contemplating deferring expenditure to year 2 of the 10-year strategic plan. So if there's considerable uncertainty around the 10-year plan, around Three Waters, around where that might sit, and it's in the process of coming together, what happens if we just decide to defer decision today? What's the compelling reason to decide?
The compelling reason to decide is that there is no provision in the long-term plan to complete this project. So what we're bringing in front of you is an issue with budget, and there needs to be a resolution to consider resolving that as part of your LTP deliberations. The current long-term plan assumes that this project is done and completed in the current financial year.
The CFO will comment.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. If we're to have any chance of success in fundraising, we need to have it planned, and therefore the tie-in with the long-term plan's quite strong. It's unlikely funders would consider giving us funding if we don't have budgeted expenditure ourselves.
Thank you. So, but one could assume that if in the 10-year plan deliberations the budget is reinstated and targeted for year 2 of the 10-year plan, that shouldn't delay the process of fundraising.
Yes, this committee doesn't actually have the authority to put it in the 10-year plan. That needs to come on the 9th of June through the Committee of Council.
I understand that, and but my question to you is, could you decide after that?
Yes. So I think what you're asking is, do you need to decide on an option today? And the answer from my perspective is not necessarily. However, I think it's important that a decision is made or put forward for the Committee of Council to consider what size of budget we would be considering.
Thanks, that's good.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one further question. 5.1 has got the analysis of options and the financials. So it talks about the new operational costs to cover each of the options, which is, I appreciate having that in there because that hasn't always been something we've included in proposals. But I may have missed it. I can't see where the correlation is to the proposed increased operating expense, where that is also included in the recommendations. So we've got here operational costs of $6,000 per year, which I think actually stands for option 1 in the current scope. But I'm not saying that if that's the preferred choice. Just considering through the long-term plan, we've had these conversations about the lack of increasing funding when we've done new projects, but that hasn't followed through to the decision. So would that be an amendment required? I think I'm now directing my question to you, Stuart, because it's financial. Do we need, essentially I'm saying, are we needing to pass a resolution that would support that increased operating grant alongside the works proposed here?
It's an excellent question and you raise a good point. We won't necessarily be making a long-term plan decision here, but when that comes to the 9th of June, we'll certainly incorporate those operating expenses as a component of that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a question about the fundraising, so somebody can choose to answer it. My question is, what does our fundraising officer think is fundable? Is it the bonsai house? Is it the shade house? Is it the combination project? What is his advice on that?
The advice is that it's easier at the bonsai house concept to fundraise because there are groups of interest around bonsai particularly who may be able to contribute. I think we would lose access to those groups of interest if we didn't have the bonsai house option, and that would make it more difficult to fundraise for.
Have we explored funding for the shade house at all?
No, we haven't, because the shade house is in effect a renewal project. So it's an existing council asset, it's not adding anything additional, and it's very difficult to get funding for renewal projects.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've got 2 areas of questioning. The first one is in 4.5, talking about the options for funding option 1. Option 1B has got a table to say proposed projects to cancel in order to bring funding forward. And then there's a whole list of projects totalling $500,000. Those projects that, were we to choose that option, would be cancelled in order to bring the funding forward. Would they just disappear, or what would happen to those projects? Because presumably they've been consulted on in the master plan in the same way that the bonsai house has.
Yes, it's a very good question. So the Esplanade Master Plan is intended to be the plan for the long-term development of the Esplanade. Not all things in the master plan are currently funded in the 2018 LTP. So these projects are funded in the LTP, and what we're saying is if you wanted to stay within that LTP envelope, we could cancel some of those others and we could proceed ahead with the current funding level we have, but some things would miss out. Now, if things missed out, they would be like the other things that haven't been included and would probably be considered in later years. There has been no consultation with the user group about the individual projects that may get moved for the bonsai house, other than to make them aware that we're coming to this committee, and that is one of the options that the council prudently should consider, which is living within the current financial envelope.
Okay, and so then my second question is around the community support stroke pressure, I suppose, for the bonsai house and the shade house. So we had a handful of submissions around it in 2018. But, I mean, would there be an outrage if we were to say, we're not going to go ahead with this? I just don't have a gauge of where we think the community support is at for the shade house and the bonsai house. And maybe you have got a better feel for it than I have.
I probably don't have that direct gauge, other than to say that the community was very supportive of continuing to add additional features to the esplanade and areas of interest. The community were aware through the master plan framework development that we have a bonsai collection. The community, through their submissions and the reason it was included in the master plan, were supportive that that collection be available for viewing. The relative priority of this project versus other things in the master plan, we haven't gauged that because we didn't engage with the community at that type of level.
Okay. But in terms of did we discuss costs at any point with the community?
Yes, you did that when you included an amount in the long-term plan for the bonsai house, which now is clearly insufficient.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to clarify the number of bonsai. It says in the report we have now 58 trees, and yet in the display, in the imagery, we've got 9 plinths for them to be displayed. Is that the actual outcome that's intended? I just want to understand the difference of how many bonsai trees we have and what's intended to display.
You're correct, Councillor. We do have a collection now numbering 58, and the local bonsai club's president has been overseeing bringing those up to a display standard. He advises not all of them are at a standard that could be displayed, and the intent of a 9 to 10-ish plinth display is that the plants on display would rotate, that you wouldn't come to the bonsai house once and see the plants and think, I never, I've seen them, I don't need to go back again. It might be dictated by season and what plants in what particular form at what time of year, or what might have recently come up to a display standard. The other opportunity would be potentially, although it hasn't been explored fully yet, it would be for other private collections to be displayed, but there's a lot of security concerns around bonsai, so that would have to be thought through.
So I've got no comparison to other bonsai houses. Is it typical if somebody was coming to make a trip to the Esplanade to see the bonsai that's usual what you see, just a few trees? It wouldn't be
yes, it
quite
is, because the bonsais have been crafted to be viewed from all angles, to be able to, look right around, and their art form in their own right. And if you go to any Japanese gardens that display bonsai, they are designed like an art gallery to be viewed individually and not as a collection. So each individual specimen has its own uniqueness.
Okay, and just secondly, because it really is around the design, what the outcome's going to be. From the imagery, I'm not quite sure around the shade house. There's some bird's eye view that kind of look like it's a bit of a gazebo with some seating, but is actually going to have some plants, a collection, or can I understand what's under the shade house? What's intended? I'm not quite clear.
Certainly. So if you were to enter the conservatory at the moment, you move through an area that has subtropical plants in a slightly shaded environment, and our display at the moment is, could be described as spectacular. We always have really good collection of flowering plants available all year round. So replacement of the shade house is to enable us to continue with that collection at the moment. And we know that when the Gardens Trust came to assess us for our level of significance, that they made particular comment on the conservatory and the shade house and the wonderful collection and the husbandry we had in that area. So the intention is that we would be replacing that structure and continuing with the current collections we have. It's a bit like the bonsai in that the collection that we have there, we have glass houses out the back, that we are rotating that collection so there's always something of interest and something in flower.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Cathy and Aaron. I guess it just seems that the closer and closer we get to these decisions, the more and more the word bonsai and house sort of really come together. And is there something particular about bonsai that means they need their own house rather than a place in somebody else's house?
You could display them in a number of different ways, and some of the options allude to that, and you could display them within the shade house. At the start of the project, we were trying to deliver a high-quality environment, and so the description for the consultants was to deliver something of high quality, of some authenticity in terms of displaying the plants, and that's what's been put forward at this point. But if you decide otherwise, then we can adapt to that scope.
So in terms of the management of the plants and their health and all that sort of stuff would be reasonably similar if they were included in displays that had other plants?
There's a couple of things with bonsai. One is that they're very valuable.
Yeah.
So part of the construction of the bonsai house is to allow for them to be viewed from all angles, but to also be secure. So in some of the other bonsai collections I've visited, they are, within gated structures, bars, all sorts of things to maintain that security. Our current provisions in our shade house, we would have to create something secure. The other thing about the bonsais, they need to be rotated because they can't stay on display the whole time. They need to go into an environment that is more conducive to their growth. So while they're on display, they're fine there for a short period of time, in the same way that we rotate the houseplants in this building and then put them to a more optimum environment.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any other questions? Councillor Denison.
Just wanted to understand the actual square metre footprint that this house would actually achieve, the shade house and the bonsai display area.
In front of me, I have this square metre reference for the shade house. It's 190 square metres, and I haven't got the square metre for the bonsai display in front of me. It looks like about a quarter of that, so we could be looking at about 240 square metres. Sorry, I don't have that. Didn't bring the designs down with me, the detailed designs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's the last question, so thank you very much. You may step down. Now, I have a recommendation that the Mayor is wanting to put forward. So we'll go, and I'm happy to. So are you still happy to put that recommendation forward, Mr Mayor?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. And I just have a couple of notes, perhaps just to that, if I can.
Yep, that's fine. Councillor Harpeta, you wanting to second that? Yeah, it's all right. I just got it on a piece of paper. That's right. That's okay. You can leave mine on it. Yep, that's fine. Okay, so that recommendation is in front of you, that Council establishes an Esplanade Master Plan project steering group which involves bonsai house aviaries refurbishment and amongst other master plan projects, that during LTP deliberations, Council considers establishing a budget of $880,000 in year 2, dependent on external funding of $150,000. So I'll let you speak to that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, apologies, councillors, for lateness back into the chamber. Look, I don't have any real issue with this bonsai house project, and just want to acknowledge the officer's report and the winding road we've been down, because we've been through this a couple of times. But I do think it's really worthy. It is unique. The collection is, the birch collection is certainly one of the better ones in New Zealand. And I think the other thing that we can do here is connect with Mihara, our Japanese sister city, where the president of the Japanese Bonsai Association lives. And I think they can offer us some expertise as well. So I do think it goes in with that whole Esplanade experience. Look, there has been some obvious scope creep here. That's probably worrying some councillors, but I think it's been an example of the project evolving as well. It has lost a little bit of the community drive, and I think some of the questions sort of, as I came into the chamber, teased that out and the connections, but they can be re-established, and COVID hasn't helped us in that aspect. It has become a little bit disconnected from external funding, and we need the appropriate time to raise the funds, hence the year 2 aspect of the second part to the amendment. And it's become a little bit disconnected from us as elected members. So I believe there's going to be other projects at the Esplanade coming to us, like the Aviaries refurbishment, and I think that fits into a very similar project status as this one does. So how do we fix this? How do we give the officers some direction? And I'm aware they do want that too, because the projects are in our LTP. They are, I think, community shaping. So what are we going to do? So this amendment does give some direction to that. I point to the successful and good example of the Arena project steering group, which had multiple projects, were all going all over the place. They were part of a master plan, but the project steering group gave it some discipline. It enabled management to get round it, and ultimately some action that was on time and generally on budget. So this brings various officers from different units together, because we've got parks and reserves, but we've got property people, we've got infrastructure people, we've got external fundraising people. So it really brings all of those people together. With a project manager that can either be internal or external, that sort of looks over this and the wider master plan projects. That there are the external fundraisers involved from the start, not at the end. That's quite important, hence the time frame as well. That there is some representation of the user group, the stakeholders. Not everybody, and I emphasise not everybody in the user group, because there's 18 plus people in that, and they come from quite different parts of the Esplanade. But they should be represented, and they inform the PSG. And there needs to be some elected member involvement in it at some stage too. So the PSG option will really help give this project and others that are going to come at us and gives the officers some direction as well. It just keeps it disciplined and on target. And look, the establishment of a PSG will pull all the programs together. It keeps the scope, the budget, the funding in place, and external fundraising can come too. And I look at different parts that it could come from. The local Japanese community here in Palmerston North, other local horticultural societies, our sister city of Mihara, Japanese companies in the city, and we've got 3 major ones in Kubota, Toyota and Hino, the Japanese embassy, and of course trusts and lotteries. So there is an opportunity here that it just doesn't all fall on ratepayers. And so I'd like you to consider this. I think the master plan and a steering group is a proven model. It works. And one way of enabling this project of the Bonsai Shade House and also others that are going to come, it just keeps the discipline and the funding in place. So look, I'd ask you to support it, please. Thank you.
CE would like to speak.
Yes, I would just like to make one comment in that we need to be very clear about when we determine the terms of reference, because I wish to remind Council that this group or any cannot direct staff and instruct staff, that is the responsibility of the Chief Executive.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My read of the recommendations is it's broadly just a perhaps mash-up of the officer recommendations, but without specifying option 1 as the preferred option. It's still, but the budget aligns with what's being proposed. So I guess want to see clarification in the second recommendation of the 10-year plan, which is what we're sort of switching our terminology to from long-term plan. So these are just minor, and then specifying that this is for the bonsai and shade house, because the recommendation at the moment doesn't make reference to the report. So that's just missing. So if the mover's happy with that, then we just need to switch LTP to 10-year plan and include a comment about bonsai and shade house in there.
Yeah, I'm happy, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm not clear from the recommendation which of the three funding options for option 1 this would be intended to cover. So is that, well, I think it's probably 1C, 650,000 capital new, but it could also be new capital new 500,000 or 500,000 reprioritised. So I wondered are you able to specify where you see, is that capital new?
It's capital new. I feel, and if I could just comment on that, we'd be remiss to just start chopping and changing other options around pulling it from other projects, which was one of the other options. Get to it.
1B.
1B, and item 9, I think it was. I'll come to it anyway. It was 1B, where table 1, where proposed projects to cancel. I think we'd be silly to start putting one above the other.
I do have some sympathy for that view, because the Esplanade Master Plan is well established. But I think what I took from the officer's comments was that there is a long programme of work here, some of which is funded and some of which isn't. And so for me, I'd be quite happy to look at a reprioritisation of budget to get this priority programme through. So I'll signal, Madam Chair, that if this fails, I'll move the 1B option. Thank you,
Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just raising into question the need for a steering group on this project. The bonsai project seems pretty straightforward, and likewise, the roading entranceway seems half complete and well in hand. So, therefore, I'm kind of wondering, without going through a long-term plan, just around what the budget priorities are going to be over the next year or two, and if it needs to gather, a selection of 18 user groups. I was kind of floored that there's 18 user groups, let alone all the staff that you'd kind of suggest might need to come around that with our political representation too. And so just wondering if this project on its own is a catalyst to create a whole steering group. And I see that as being a separate decision, and probably not one that I'd support at this stage, because I think it's still questionable whether this project's going to get over the line even in another month, because of the cost and maybe without gauging what people's views might be for it still. So question mark on one, and probably oppose it at this point, but happy to advance it into the deliberations for the wider debate in the long-term plan. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not going to be supporting these recommendations. I agree with Councillor Dennison. I don't see the need for a steering group. If we need a steering group to build a bonsai house, I think we're in trouble. And in terms of the total budget, I just don't agree with it going up to 880,000. I think there's definitely been a big element of project creep here. So I would personally favour option 3, which is improving the existing shade house on its existing footprint with a modest bonsai display within the shade house, which costs 530,000. And I think that's a more realistic amount of money to spend. It's still more or less double what we originally proposed. But I just think with the budget going up to 880,000, whether or not we manage to fundraise 150,000, and that in itself I think is doubtful, quite honestly, it's too much money to be spending on this project, and we could achieve the same aims of improving the shade house and displaying the bonsai for a lot less. So that's why I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think the bit of confusion around what the Esplanade Master Plan Steering Group is, I think it's to cover the whole master plan, not just the bonsai house. So I think the bonsai house is one part of it, but it's around the whole master plan, and the bonsai house is the first part of it. So I think I would support number one. Number two is a big creep for me, so I'm not sure about number two, but definitely would be supporting number one. I do think there does need to be some discipline around with a project steering group. Being a part of the Arena one, did see the merits in having a project steering group and how that project went really well because of the discipline of having a project steering group. And I do think projects go so much better when you have got that discipline, and that's what I think this project needs, because it is such a big project of the whole master plan, which is what I think we are talking about.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate these new options coming to hand here. Not quite ready to jump in on recommendation one yet. I think if anything, I'd want to see a terms of reference there and understand to what extent it is sorting out the bonsai house versus the entire master plan. And if it is the entire master plan, I'd certainly want to see terms of reference around that rather than just having a recommendation sitting here. And yeah, this is on the second recommendation. I'm definitely not in the 880,000 crowd. I think we've received a gift, and we've heard that there's other ways that that gift could be honored and shared with the community that would not come to that sort of funding level. I think that the option three, the replacement on similar footprint is probably more of a right size in terms of budget, and gives us still that opportunity to share these living treasures with the community, but in a way that doesn't break the bank. So not really in a position to support either of these, unfortunately, at the moment. And yeah, if option two were to fail, I'd be quite prepared to support a 530K investment, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting the recommendations in front of us. I don't think this is a really high priority at the moment, and I certainly haven't heard a strong community voice in support of that. And if we're thinking about the 5 submissions from the 1828 long-term plan process, that support was when it was currently budgeted at, I think, around 94,000. So whether those people would have even supported it if we put an $880,000 price tag on it, that's anyone's guess really, but it may not be that the same level of support exists when the price goes up significantly. So I'm not really even supportive of option 3 at this point. I would rather leave the budgets as they are and leave it for the long-term plan debate. And certainly if we are to progress those projects, I'd be supportive of the approach that's outlined in recommendation 4 in our papers, where that budget is found through reprioritising the existing master plan budgets. There's there's quite a high, there's a significant budget and attachment 2 that's outlined for those projects, and I certainly don't see value in setting up yet another project steering group. The Esplanade user group, I think, would be an appropriate group to consult if there was reprioritisation of those projects.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd just like to comment. My rationale around the project steering group is that it's not a user group, and I certainly wouldn't expect 18 users to be on it. But being part of the Arena group, what I've found was very valuable was that when budgets were being contested and where we were running into problems, the group were able to, especially through the project manager, were able to come up with different solutions to enable us to be able to deliver the actual arena project. What I've noticed with the Esplanade Master Plan is that there's no plans yet, we haven't even seen proper budgets yet for the aviaries. There's the frontage, which we've already changed, budgets have doubled. There's quite a few different projects in here, and I think we should need to put these together with one steering group which can feed back into the council and give direction to officers so that we don't have some of these ad hoc decisions being made without direction. I'm not particularly comfortable with $880,000 in the budget, but I believe we are short in this budget, and it's in year 2. So that this gives us an opportunity with the bonsai and the shade house to perhaps link aviaries and other projects so that there is a budget. Whether this also gives opportunity within the 10-year plan, it gives us a budget, but it doesn't give us the authority to spend it yet. So it just gives us, for me, a PC sum that we need for the Esplanade, which we definitely need. So it's not just around the bonsai house, this is around the whole project, and it's the shade house, and there's other things that are, I've noticed that officers are recommending for us to do this, so it might mean that we could do a lot of other things within this $880,000 budget. But as I say, it doesn't give authority to spend it yet, but just puts in a PC sum for us to consider with that whole master plan for the Esplanade, which I think is important. Is there any other people that wish to comment before I give it back to the Mayor?
Just to separate, Madam Chair, the vote.
Okay, thank you. Mr Mayor, do you wish to?
Yeah, if I could just have a right of reply, please. Look, thanks for your comments. I think just be a little bit careful what we wish for here, councillors. Number one, it's proven. There's been a couple of comments it won't work. It's only for one project. There's the Aviaries refurbishment coming back to us within months. There's the roading and infrastructure projects within the Esplanade. There's significant wayfinding work to be done. There's possible other gardens. There's the mini put, which we have to deliberate on as well. So to me, that's more than enough to have a group. It's not at the same size as the arena, but it ring fences everything together, and it puts some discipline around it, like Councillor Beattie said. There won't be 18 of the user group people there. I emphasise this is not the user group. The user group will have some input and some representation on this group. Terms of reference need to be created, absolutely. But I'm just asking you to look at the establishment of this, because we will be back in here, absolutely guaranteed, talking about other projects in a similar vein. So this gives it some discipline. If we didn't have this around the arena, we would have been debating in this chamber about overruns guaranteed. Look, the second one, if I could have that back up, please. Around deliberating, and that's what I'm asking you to do, is to put this into deliberating and considering the establishment of in year 2 of 880. Again, I'm like you, I'm the first to be in there trying to save some money. Actually, we are trying to save some money by not making it all ratepayer reliant, which is all these other options are total ratepayer reliant. This puts 150,000 around external funding. I've had some comments that we won't raise it, or we've proven you wrong with other projects. So look, I want to be proven right with this one. The bonsai house is a significant the bonsai collection is a significant collection from the Birch estate, and I'm sure that they would want to see it in the best possible, shown in the best possible way, and we'd possibly go and talk to them about some sort of contribution as well. So please, if you can consider these two amendments. Number one, I think, is an absolute must. We've got to do this. Number two, please let it get to the next stage so we can have some decent discussions about it in the deliberations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll separate those two. So we're voting on number one. So that fails because it's 8 all. So we'll go to number 2. Oh, I do too, thank you. And that is carried 10 votes for and 6 against. Right, so that's the end of that item. So we'll now go on to the work schedule. So I'm happy to move the work schedule. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Are there any questions or comments around the work schedule? Oh, thank you both. So there being none, we will vote on the work schedule. And that is carried 16 unanimously. Councillor Naylor, this is not about the work schedule, is it? Well, I'm sorry, you've missed, we've voted. Now I'm moving item number 11, exclusion of the public. So for item number 12, we're excluding the public for the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 28th of April for reasons set out. And for item number 13, award of contract 3910 for seismic strengthening of the Turitea water treatment plant, and that's because of commercial activities and negotiations. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Butt. Are there any comments? Councillor Naylor? Oh, did I not? Okay. So we'll go to vote.